Good evening, Karina Carvalho with ABC News. The Palaszczuk Government has delivered its second budget, promising surpluses for the next 4 years. It's also pouring money into regional jobs and infrastructure. Soon we'll speak to the Treasurer and Opposition Leader live. But first, to State political reporter George Roberts. George, in tough economic times, how has the Treasurer managed to balance the books?
Well, certainly this year's surplus has taken a hit and the mining downturn has wiped away billions in revenue. But the Treasurer Curtis Pitt is vowing to keep spending levels below earnings and claims he can deliver the best surplus in 10 years next year. There's also record cash splashes on a range of fronts. So to pay for it all, he's putting the squeeze on government departments, taking back excess money from a public sector superannuation scheme and again asking government-owned businesses to play a part. It's about building things, bringing businesses to Queensland and boosting investment from elsewhere.
Innovation, investment and infrastructure are all at their core about one thing: jobs.
The budget papers show a small operating surplus this year, more than $1 billion lower than expected.
But that's due in no small part to the federal government's unilateral decision in last month's federal budget to defer more than $1 billion in natural disaster funding from the 2015-16 year.
So the Treasurer keeps the budget's head above water this year by $152 million, then predicts next year's will be the best surplus in a decade at $867 million. It then climbs to more than $1 billion, tumbles and regains, but stays in the black. Debt will go up, but the government slowed debt growth by paying more off. Infrastructure spending is on the up, with $40 billion over 4 years. $10.7 billion of that to be spent in the next year. But the government's priority project, Cross River Rail, gets just 1% of what it would cost to build.
We know, and I've said this on a number of occasions, that this is a significant piece of infrastructure.
There's also a $100 million regional jobs package, with cash bonuses of up to $15,000 for businesses who hire the long-term unemployed.
If you are a business owner out there and you want to employ someone in your company, let us know.
Tackling domestic violence gets nearly $200 million in funding.
Everyone knows someone who's been impacted, either in their own home, their friends or their family. It has devastating long-term consequences.
Where's the rest of the money going?
This economic plan builds on the work we began in the 2015-16 budget. It again allocates record funding to health and education.
Roads and rural infrastructure get nearly $10 billion. Some of the extra cash comes from a public sector superannuation surplus.
Half of that $4 billion will be used to reduce debt and half will be invested in infrastructure.
It is a disappointing budget. As Tim said, a budget of raids, rip-offs and write-downs.
Looking elsewhere to balance the books, government ministers are expected to find savings of $450 million over 4 years. Education is the hardest hit, having to find about $190 million in fat to cut. There's some creative accounting to offset debt too, moving surplus money from government-owned businesses onto the government's own balance sheet. Swift to react, the opposition's on the attack.
What we are seeing here is Curtis Pitt, in his desperation, grabbing the free cash available and held by those corporations and using it to balance his own books.
The opposition leader will give a formal budget reply on Thursday. George Roberts, ABC News, Brisbane.
Joining me live now from State Parliament is Treasurer Curtis Pitt. Thank you so much for your time tonight. Does the government stand ready to pour money back into the defined benefit super scheme if there are some adverse effects like economic or shareholder downturn?
Look, absolutely, Karina. What we have is a situation that our advice comes from the state actuary, as per our fiscal principle, to ensure that at all times any repatriation of money from a surplus is okay to do. And of course, we will be taking that advice because we value the fact that it sets us apart from other states. What we have done is clearly applied money from the surplus to put it to good use in the economy right now, where we need it. This is a get back to work budget, and that is very very focused on regional Queensland. It is about, of course, growing innovation. It's about attracting investment, and it is about building infrastructure. And we see a $10.7 billion capital program this year across the state, almost half of which is going to be spent in regional Queensland. We know it's a part of the economy which is transitioning more slowly from the mining construction boom, and that's very important that we focus our attentions where it is needed most at the moment.
Treasurer, the budget assumes growth of 4% with the mining downturn. Are you being overly optimistic?
No, what we have is a situation where, thanks to the forward-thinking previous Labor government and the work that we continue, we have liquefied natural gas, which is providing us nation-leading growth, not only in the 16-17 year, but across the forward estimates. It's important to note that, of course, that is very much export-driven, and so that is why we're clearly focused on a Get Back to Work budget, which is about driving the domestic economy as strongly as possible. There are many things in this budget for people right across the state. In southeast Queensland, we clearly have fair relief to help people, particularly job seekers and asylum seekers, to ensure that they have fairer fares, and that's going to benefit everyone. But regional Queensland is the big winner with a $100 million back to work package, particularly focusing on getting more people and more employers engaging with particularly long-term unemployed people.
Curtis Pitt, will have to leave it there, and you can question the Treasurer on the ABC News Facebook page from 7:30. The government has branded it as back to work, but critics of Curtis Pitt's second budget say more needs to be done. While key stakeholder groups have been positive about the economic blueprint, some industry bodies say it relies on money the state doesn't have.
Another record spend for health and education, more nurses, more teachers and more schools.
So from our perspective, this is a budget that would get a 7 out of 10 because it's clearly delivering on some of our key priorities.
But they come at a cost, and some are questioning the figures.
We are relying on money that we have not yet earned, and we are spending money that we have not yet earned.
Still, the budget centrepiece of jobs and infrastructure for the regions has received widespread praise.
This is an area of the state that has really borne the brunt of economic difficulty. This is the area of the state where jobs have been shed.
Townsville got their stadium, which is good for them, but they had to win a grand final to get it, so I don't know what Rocky and Mackay are going to do.
Delving into the public servants' defined benefit superannuation scheme has been branded sensible and responsible by the unions.
That's absolutely critical because Queensland needs jobs and Queensland needs to stimulate our regional economies as well.
Transport concessions for battlers have been welcomed, but increasing electricity prices are bound to hurt.
The biggest issue that's facing many people across this state is around cost of living and the fact that 500,000 people are living in poverty.
Doctors have welcomed preventative health measures, but say obesity missed out.
We continue as a nation and as a state to get fatter.
And the tourism industry is feeling the love with a $33 million boost.
It does feel like tourism is finally recognised as a major driver of the economy, as a major opportunity for Queensland.
There's funding to protect koalas, crocodiles, cassowaries.
And then there's the elephant, that one in the room.
We would like both government and the opposition to reconsider their position on asset sales or asset recycling down the track. We've seen the benefits of that in other states.
A conversation some lobby groups say still needs to be had. Leonie Mellor, ABC News.
For more on the opposition's response, I'm joined by LNP leader Tim Nicholls. Tim Nicholls, you've accused the government of raiding super. Expert Treasury advice says the government could have actually taken more. What's wrong with using excess money to pay down debt and build infrastructure?
Well, Karina, this is a disappointing budget for Queenslanders. It promises more jobs, but the unemployment rate's going up. It promises to cut debt, but debt continues to increase. And it promises to build more infrastructure, but in fact it cuts $2 billion over the situation we left. So these raids on public superannuation funds aren't actually delivering what the government's promising. And more importantly, they put at risk the superannuation that's been stored up and paid away by generations of governments and generations of public servants, and we don't see the gains that Curtis Pitt's talking about.
Mr Nicholls, Labor promised to deliver a surplus, and it has. It's done that without selling off assets and building infrastructure at the same time. Why won't you give the government credit for that?
Well, no, look, the government is claiming an operating surplus, and you've heard Nick Berens talk about the heroic assumptions around the revenue forecasts. They've got those wrong every year that they've predicted them. We delivered 2 operating surpluses and fiscal surpluses. So there's nothing special about this. This is just heroic assumptions by Curtis Pitt, none of which have been proved right in his previous budget.
Tim Nichols, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Karina.